Okay, and welcome back, students taking financial accounting. And in this series of videos, we are working on the Chapter 2 exercises, Group B. And in the last video, we were working on exercise 2-29. And so we're going to jump there. And again, if you don't understand something, watch the videos again. And if you still have a question, feel free to contact an instructor. But right now for this exercise, what we have to do is prepare the income statement, statement of retained earnings, and the balance sheet. All right, so we have our trial balance here, okay? And I'm not going to bounce back and forth between slides in order to look at this trial balance. I actually have the trial balance solution, the solution for the problem, and I'm looking at that trial balance on the side so that I can create the financial statements. All right, so you might want to do the same or use the one that you have, all right, that you created, and hopefully it looks exactly like mine, okay? Now we're going to create the income statement. And remember, we create the income statement first because we need that profit or loss to be able to calculate our retained earnings, our ending retained earnings, and then the ending retained earnings we use on the balance sheet. So we have to do the income statement, then retained earnings, and then the balance sheet in that order. Right, so the heading for the income statement, and again, I am just abbreviating here, Nolan Construction Inc. You would be writing this all out. Income statement, you would write that all out. And the date is either, I can write it as for the month ending September 30th, 2014. Or I could have just written it as month ended September 2014, like it's showing in the solution. I have a tendency to like to write for the month ending. And remember, that is, this heading is center aligned. When I'm looking at projects and stuff, for whatever reason, the date, a lot of students lose points because they don't put the date correctly. Remember, the income statement is for a period of time, and that's why you give it the heading month ended or for the month ending, okay? Because it designates that period of time. Right? So after the first thing that we do, and remember, when we're creating financial statements, if you follow the process and you just keep doing the process again and again and again, even though different businesses have different charts of accounts and different ledger accounts, you can create the statement by following the same exact process and just allow for the deviation. So you create the heading first, and then I write revenues, and I write expenses, because these are the categories of accounts, okay? Then the next thing I do is I list those accounts. In this case here, we have service revenues, and I'm abbreviating here. And I have rent expense and utility expense. Utilities expense, right? Now, the question becomes, are we doing single step or multi-step? My suggestion is to get accustomed to doing multi-step. Why? Because whenever you have a mathematical calculation, you use more than one column, okay? Since we only have one account for service revenue, all right, in the rightmost column, I'm going to put the balance in that account. Of course, I put a dollar sign because it's the first amount, right? First dollar amount. And that represents my revenue. It makes no sense for me to put total revenue here and write it again. Okay, so because I only have the one account, I could just put that one amount there. And remember, when we're looking down this column, we're looking at revenues less our expenses. So I'm going to have a total expense here, which will then give me my profit or loss. Okay, that's what I want to see in this column. I just want to kind of like see two amounts, right? But because I have more than one account here for my expenses, okay, I'm going to use a mathematical calculation and use my left-hand column, okay, in order to do the math for that, so that I only have a total expense. All right. So my total expense, I have put in the description here. Remember, that's where this amount is going to go. Okay. So I have rent expense, and that amount was $17.50. And since it's the first number in this column, I put the $sign. And then for my utilities, I have $285. And since that's the mathematical calculation, I draw an underline to show it's a mathematical calculation, and I'm going to write that amount in the right-hand column. Okay? So my total expenses are $2,035. Now, I have my revenues less my expenses. That's a mathematical calculation, so I draw an underline. Okay? And in this case here, since my revenues are greater than my expenses, I have a profit. So I'm going to call that net income. And that net income amount is $775. And since it's the end of the calculation, I put my double underline and put my dollar amount. And that's what my income statement looks like. Okay, just that simple. Okay. Now remember, this here 775 is now going to go over on to our retained earnings statement. So on the next slide, we're going to create the statement of retained earnings. So I have the heading again, right? And I'm going to abbreviate statement of retained earnings. And the heading date should be the same date, the same heading for the it should be the same heading date as from the income statement, because it is for a period of time. Okay, so and of course it's center aligned. So that's the first thing I do. Then the second thing I do is I have to put in the beginning date and the end date. All right, so I have retained earnings, and I'm abbreviating here. And the first date of this period is September 1st, 2014, and the ending date is that I'm going to put it at the bottom, and that's for September 30th, 2014. Okay, so I start out with a beginning retained earnings, and in this case here, since this is the first month of business, I didn't have any amount from the last accounting period, right? Because we weren't in business, so my beginning retained earnings started out at 0, and I put that in the rightmost column, and I put my $sign there, right? Then the next thing we have to do is I'm going to write the word add, and in this case here, net income. And that net income was $775 from the income statement, right? And so since I'm adding those two together, I have a subtotal. I have a subtotal. Write that in, and that's a mathematical calculation, so I have 775. So I know I'm adding these two numbers together to get this, but now I'm going to take out less dividends. Okay, and in this case here, there's 0 because I didn't pay out any dividends. So the mathematical calculation for 775 and 0 gives me 775, which is what my retained earnings amount is at the end of that period. So retained earnings September 30th, 2014. And since that's the end of my mathematical calculation, double underline and the dollar sign. Okay. And so that's my statement of retained earnings. Now, if you look at the solution, you'll notice because we didn't have any dividends, right, and we don't even have a dividend account, right, you actually don't need to put that in, right? So notice what just happened, right? I erased that, and since my subtotal became my ending retained earnings, I don't need a subtotal either, okay? So I only have 3 lines for this here retained earnings statement, because this is my ending amount, double underline, and I've just shortened it. But notice when I had gone and I had included the less dividends, and then I had the retained earnings here, that's the what the statement should look like if you have a net income and your dividends. But when you don't have a dividends, and again, it's following a process, but you use what you need for that particular situation. And in this case here, we don't have, we don't need to put in the subtotal and the dividend amounts because we don't have it. Okay, and that's what your statement of retained earnings for this particular problem, for this particular situation should look like. Now, remember that this 775 is our ending retained earnings. Even though it's the same amount as the net income, our net income is 775 and our ending retained earnings is 775. So this ending retained earnings of 775 is going to come down here on our balance sheet. So create our balance sheet. Heading. I'm just going to abbreviate. Now for the date, as of September 30th, 2014. Okay, I like writing the words as of, but if all you did was just put the date September 30th, 2014, that wouldn't be wrong either. Okay, center aligned. Then I'm going to write my categories of accounts. So assets, and then I'm going to put liabilities here. And I'm going to abbreviate stockholders' equity here. Actually, I'm going to move that up a little bit. Okay, so in the process, again, go through a process. I showed you the process for income statement. I showed you the process for retained earnings. This is the process for the balance sheet. Write in those categories of accounts. Right? Now, we're going to add in our ledger accounts. So I have cash. I'm abbreviating accounts receivable, supplies, equipment, and furniture. And then I'm going to add in for liabilities, accounts payable, and for equity, all right, I have common stock. And now notice I'm going to be using the retained earnings account. Why? And that's why I added the retained earnings up here into my chart of accounts. They didn't tell us to use that account, and we haven't gone through the closing process, which is in the next, which you're going to learn in the next chapter. But this income, this net income right here, right, that gets closed out to the retained earnings account. Okay, and again, you'll learn about that in chapter 3. But that retained earnings gets, becomes the part of the ending retained earnings there, which shows up on our balance sheet. So you need that general ledger account in order to put that 775 into, right? And that's why I added that account to my chart of accounts, and I created a ledger account for it. And again, you're not going to see that process until the next chapter, but here we're utilizing it as if we did the work for the next chapter, and this is the end result. So I have to add in, a ledger account called retained earnings, and those are my ledger accounts. Now, let's put in the amounts. So for assets, for cash, I had a balance of 47,540. For receivables, I had 1,835. For supplies, 225. Equipment, 1,400. And for furniture, 2,700. Right? So we want to know what our total assets are. So I have to write in the description and total assets. I see students who just put just the word total. Okay. If all you do is just write total, that's wrong. That's not the description. Okay. You'll lose points. It needs to be total assets. Right? So underline to show the mathematical calculation, and that amount ends up being, when I add these up, 53,700, and since that's the end of the calculation, it gets a double underline. Now, just like on the income statement where we only had one account for service revenue, so we could put it in the right-hand column, since we only have one account for the liability, which is accounts payable, I can put that in the right-hand column as 2925. Okay, and I don't need to write in total liabilities here because I know that what's in my right-hand column is my total liabilities. But now when I come down here to common stock, and this is where I'm going to deviate from a single step. I'm going to use multi-step. Since I have two accounts for stockholders' equity, I'm going to want to know what my total stockholders' equity is. And that amount I'm going to have in the right-hand column, so that when I do the math for the right-hand column, I have liabilities plus equity to give me, my total liability plus equity. All right. So I'm going to use a second column, a column to the left. I'm going to put in the $50,000 for my stockholders' equity and my retained earnings amount of 775, since that's the mathematical calculation and underline. And so my total stockholders' equity is 775 here. Okay, and now we know that that's going to be a mathematical calculation in this column, right? And we're going to give it the description, total liabilities, and I'm abbreviating, and stockholders' equity, and that amount is the 53,700. Okay, so 2925 plus 50,775 gives me 53,700. I put the dollar sign and the double underline showing it's the end of the calculation, and of course assets have to equal liabilities plus equity. If they do, great, I'm good to go. If they don't, if they're not equal, I made a mistake somewhere and that needs to be corrected. Okay, but now that's what this here balance sheet looks like. That's what the statement of retained earnings look like, and the income statement. So we've just now completed this exercise. And since I'm at 19 minutes, I'll quickly say, if you don't understand something, go back and watch the theory videos. Make sure you're doing the homework problems and getting them right, and if not, watching these videos. And if you don't understand what's on the video, watch them again. And if you still don't understand, contact an instructor. But accounting is about understanding an application. You can't just read and think you'll get it. You're not going to get it. You have to do the work. And if you've looked at this homework problem and you did the work, and then you looked at the solution, try to figure out what you did wrong and why you did it wrong. And if not, then yeah, watch the videos and see me go through it so that it kind of like sticks in your head. And honestly, that'll be the quickest way that it sticks in your head. because you're seeing it actually work through. You know, if you just decide to just watch the videos and not do the work, it's not going to stick. All right. So with that said, we're done with 229, and I will see you for the next problem in the next video, which will be for exercise 2-30. And fortunately, that's the last one that we'll be doing for the exercises. So see you then.